So hi everyone, happy Friday again. Here we are. Welcome to today's discovery session. So I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficacy Canada. Before we start today, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge those who are joining us from Alberta. You may have heard that yesterday the government of Alberta announced the dissolution of Energy Efficiency Alberta effective September 30th of this year. So while they will be folding some of the functions into the agency into Emission Reductions Alberta, not having a central agency with a mandate to do research, education, and outreach, or the training that allows for sector building is truly a missed opportunity to create local jobs and save Albertans money. So now it's as a time that's more important than ever to show support to our sector. So if you haven't already, please visit our website under the Take Action tab to send a one-click letter to your elected official in support of energy efficiency for part of Canada's economic recovery. I'll be sending an email out to everyone with this link after today's session, along with a link to our press release regarding Energy Efficiency Alberta as an FYI, and also you're more than welcome to share that with your networks as well. A reminder that our voices are truly stronger when they're united, so each and every letter does in fact make a difference. So before we get started, a reminder, our guest speaker will present for approximately 20 minutes before we open up the floor to questions and general community discussion for approximately 20 minutes as well. If you've attended before, you'll know that we have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 Eastern Time. So without further ado, let's get started. It's my pleasure today to introduce Yasmin Abraham, who's the founder of EmpowerMe. She will provide an overview of the program that targets newcomers to Canada and why the need for in-language support is so high in Canada as it relates to Canadian demographics and the levels of understanding in our multicultural communities. Please join me in welcoming Yasmin.
Thank you, Natalie. My name is Yasmin Abraham, and as Natalie mentioned, I'm the founder of EmpowerMe and Kambo Energy Group, and I'm coming to you here from rainy Burnaby, British Columbia, from my kids' playroom, as you can see, and on the unceded and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nation. And the acknowledgement in that is just a small step in the work I think we're all doing towards reconciliation. So we are Campo Energy Group. We have two divisions, EmpowerMe and Community Power. EmpowerMe provides energy education for newcomers and immigrants, and Community Power delivers holistic energy and housing solutions for Indigenous communities. With the world as it is today, this is obviously a very hot topic. And I just want to thank Efficacy Canada and Natalie and Corey for giving a voice to this issue and sharing their platform on this. So I'm going to go through a couple things quickly in 20 minutes. Equity and what that means for energy efficiency. Demographics of people of color in Canada, barriers as they relate to DSM or demand side management, and some insights and learnings that we have gleaned from doing this for the last 10 years. So what is equity? When we talk about equity and inequality, we're really talking about the systemic barriers that ensure some people don't have the same opportunities as others. So we can see in this image that in inequality, in equal systems, the tree is bent to one side, and so the people who happen to be on one side of the tree get the apples, and the people who happen to be on the other side cannot get them. When we're thinking about equality, we're really focusing on the input. So in this case, everybody gets the same height ladders, which means that the tree is still bent, and the people on the left can get the apples, and the people on the right still can't get them. Equity focuses on the output. So what do we need to do? What tools and systems and programs do we need to ensure that everybody can reach the apples and have the same opportunities? So the person on the right needs a little bit of a higher ladder to reach that apple. And when we're thinking about justice, which I'm sure we're all thinking about right now, we're really looking at changing the tree. So how can we change the tree so that everybody has equal access to those apples? And there are systemic barriers that are rooted throughout our society, and unfortunately, DSM is no different. We are not an exception. Equity, when we think about equity in the DSM world, excuse me, historically, we've always looked at subsidized programs for low-income customers, and that lots of energy poverty programs across the country. EmpowerMe focuses on equity for racialized and visible minority customers and communities, specifically newcomers and immigrants. So when we look at persons of color across our country, 7.7 million people of color live in Canada. That's 22% of our friends and neighbors. And by 2036, Stats Canada is projecting that 1 in 3 of us will be a person of color. Some demographics of people of color, and you'll kind of notice me switching between the term visible minority and people of color. The term visible minority was actually initiated, it's a very Canadian term, initiated by the Employment Equity Act and is used in the census. And it defines visible minorities as persons other than Aboriginal persons who are non-Caucasian in race or non-white in color. So, you know, I think there's a growing sense that the term visible minority is outdated and perhaps a bit discriminatory. So you'll hear me switching between those two things. People of color are highly educated. They are more educated than the general population. 42% have a degree or diploma, as opposed to 29%. And yet they earn less and are more likely to be considered low income than the general population. And 68% of people of color in our country are immigrants, or conversely, 32% of people of color are born in Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about barriers and how that shows up in the energy efficiency world. So one of the biggest barriers I think we all think about is income and financial barriers. And energy poverty is a space that we as an organization have been working on for many years. And across the country, there's 2.8 million people who are struggling to pay their bills. And energy poverty is defined as spending more than double the national average on your bills. And this really means that not only are people making tough choices of whether to heat their homes or feed their kids, it also means that there's financial barriers to access a lot of the energy efficiency programs that are out there that require a financial investment to take part of them. The research has shown, you know, the mental and physical impacts of energy poverty across our country. And energy poverty varies across provinces and territories, but currently there's no national strategy to tackle energy poverty and support families that really need help. And it really depends on the landscape and legislation and the regulations of the province in terms of what kind of support families receive. So that leaves us with a really fragmented response to energy poverty. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how this is felt especially hard in Indigenous communities, where energy use is extremely high, given the very poor housing. And it's further compounded just by our lack of understanding of the data of the homes in these communities, which causes many DSM programs to be off the mark and underutilized in these communities. So when we look at people of color and energy poverty, we can see from the data that in some jurisdictions more than others, it's going to be more important to consider people of color when designing energy poverty programs. So some of the other barriers, institutional and systemic barriers for in DSM for people of color, I think maybe the second obvious one that people might automatically think about is language and literacy. In Canada, 11.7 million Canadians, that's 23% of us list a non-official language as our mother tongue. And obviously, if our programs are in English or default to English, that's going to be a barrier to access. But I think something that maybe is not automatically considered is for people who can speak English and can get around, in English fine, they still are more comfortable in their mother tongue. And when we think about filling out forms or asking questions or having contractors coming into our homes, some people are going to be more comfortable and have a higher level of trust if that is in their language. I often think of my mother-in-law in this way. She came to Canada 50 years ago. And if you met her, she speaks English, she can converse with you, and you would never assume that there's a barrier there. But I've noticed that when she reads to my kids or when she's writing, there is a real barrier, a literacy barrier there. And when we're talking about anything that is in depth or requires education or she's trying to learn something, she always defaults to her mother tongue. So I think that's something to consider when we are thinking of the language barrier, that it's not just for people who cannot speak English. The second barrier, I think, is we assume a level of experience in Canadian homes. And I'm sure there's lots of you here who are immigrants like me. And when you immigrate to Canada, everything is new. I remember the grocery stores are different, the cereal is different, the milk tastes weird, the housing is different, how you sign up for a cell phone is different. Literally everything is different. And a lot of people that we work with have never had natural gas systems. They've never had furnaces. They've never had air conditioners. They often don't know what the thermostat on the wall is, and they're scared to touch it. And so there's this barrier to understanding how their homes work, which stops them from taking advantage of energy efficiency programs. 90% of the people we work with say that they had a different heating system in their home country. I think we also, as an industry and as a sector, assume a level of trust in government and utilities. And research shows that immigrants have a lower level of trust than our general population. We assume that people, if they have a question, they'll pick up the phone and call us. We assume that, people would be comfortable calling a helpline or asking questions, or if their bill is too high, they will call us and ask. But, research shows that immigrants have a lower level of trust. And that really becomes a barrier when programs and education is delivered by utilities and governments. And then the last barrier is really assuming, I think we assume a knowledge about energy efficiency and DSM across our industry, not just for people of color, but it's especially a big barrier for people of color and immigrants who, are not used to our rebate systems and our whole sector. We do a lot of education and answering questions about, why do utilities want me to save energy? Don't they sell me energy? Why do they want me to save energy? What's a rebate? Why is it only this much? There's a lot of education that needs to be done before people will trust that the rebate is a legitimate option for them. And of course, I have to talk about COVID and our current world that we're living in. Unfortunately, people of color and visible minorities are disproportionately impacted by COVID, not only from a health perspective, so they are testing positive more often than the general population. They're less likely to get tested for COVID, but also from a financial point of view and an economic point of view. They're more impacted by this recession than the general population. Excuse me. These are our retail workers. They are our frontline health workers. And so their financial situation is much worse than a lot of the general population. But as a side note, since empowerme has moved online in the last few weeks, we've really seen an uptake in in the participation of our programming. And I think it's around just the need in communities to have trusted information that they can access in a way that works for them. Okay, let's get into some insights. So representation does really matter. It matters who you see in roles. It matters whether they look like you. And that comes from, race, whether we speak the same language, whether your parents are from the same place my parents are from, whether we have the same religion and the same culture, we eat the same food. It does really matter. And for two main reasons. One, it builds trust. People are more likely to trust and accept information from people they relate to. But secondly, and I think more importantly, is by having representative outreach programs, programs that focus on people of color, it's going to mitigate the risk that other outreach programs have of an unintentional implicit bias against these groups. Secondly, centering on the community. So we've seen that leaning in to the lived experience of people of color to inform strategies is really impactful. And by delivering the message through a grassroots brand that's known and trusted by the community, that utility and government message is welcome into community spaces that is not, you don't see energy efficiency messaging. Think places like mosques and gurdwaras and temples and churches and community spaces. It's owned by the community. It's not a top-down approach. And I think one of the pieces that we've seen come out of this is we're avoiding this saviorism complex of, governments coming in and telling people what they should be doing then in their home. And, you should have shorter showers. These are the kind of light bulbs you should have. And not to say that that's the tone of energy messaging, but, I think it can sometimes come across that way. And we've seen that when the community owns that messaging themselves, there's a much higher level of uptake. Equity as a foundation. So by tailoring customer acquisition to customers with the greatest barriers, we can create programs with equity as a foundation. So you see three people on the fence over here, and the person in the middle is racialized and has barriers in that way, and the person furthest on the right is living in energy poverty. And so by tailoring the customer acquisition of programs to the people on the furthest right of the fence, we can make sure that equity is built in and that everybody to the left of the fence is included. So inclusivity, and this kind of relates to my point before, by utilizing an education stream as an acquisition strategy for an energy poverty program, we can actually cast a wider net for customer acquisition. And Mary talked a little bit about this last week, but by having all participants go through an education program on the way to an energy poverty program, on the way to being filtered into an energy poverty program, we can make sure that everybody receives the level of support that's appropriate for them. And what this also allows us to do is make sure everybody's included. Nobody gets rejected because they're not poor enough to be part of an energy poverty program. So everybody receives the support that's appropriate for their needs, and that might be workshops or events, it might be newsletters, it might be kits, or it might be full upgrades to their home that include, insulation and windows and furnaces. Recently, a program in Alberta that had this strategy showed 52% of the applicants to our energy poverty were people of color, and there was a study done 4 years before that showed only 9% of participants were people of color. And lastly, efficacy. So maximizing savings per home. And of course, this is important across our sector, but it's really especially important when working with people who are in energy poverty. When reducing the burden of energy on those individual homes and maximizing the savings per home is the goal and should be the goal. Traditionally, DSM programming of the 90s, we were really focused on maximizing energy savings across the entire market through adoption of technologies like CFLs. And these efforts were traditionally done to offset and delay the investment needed to add additional supply. But in low-income homes, the goal has to be energy savings, and we have to move our sector from saving 1 gigajoule in 10,000 homes to saving 10 gigajoules in 1,000 homes. And where we've seen this really work is with meaningful reductions will only really happen when we're having customized and diagnostic approaches in each of the homes. And one of the models we've seen work is that by having machine learning to automate the modeling and the costing of large quantities of homes at a time, we can really start to create individual business cases that are developed for each home that maximizes the savings over the entire budget. So homes get the upgrades that they need to maximize the savings for that specific home and have the upgrades that will have the most impact. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. That was an extremely insightful presentation. A lot of what you shared are not experiences that we know, not because we don't want to know, but I think it's because it's one of those cases that you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So as you said, it's an unintentional bias that we all have. And we're all guilty. I can remember myself, to give an example, is a conversation that you and I had around the time when you were first telling me the work that you do, and you were telling me about how newcomers who come to Canada from a warm climate don't know that they can actually change the temperature in their home using the thermostat, because they don't know that they can actually touch it, and it's something that's how you control the heat in your home. Yeah. Which, of course makes complete sense, but as a Canadian who grew up in Canada, was used to like Canadian summers and Canadian winters, and you told me about that experience, I'd never even crossed my mind that's something that you wouldn't know. So it's really important just to get out there and just find out what your biases are.
Okay,
I'm going to open the floor to questions now. Just before we do, just a reminder, there's 2 ways to ask questions. The first one is you go to the bottom of your screen and you can type your question in the Q&A box and I'll read it out. And the second one is to raise your hand and then I can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. We do have a question here from Andy Cockburn. How can training programs created in English best convert to multilingual formats?
I think this is interesting. Yeah, hi, Andy. I guess my initial reaction there is not to try and convert programs. I think that is maybe, I think that's a real barrier, that we try and just convert what we have and fit it into this population. I would really encourage looking at this population to provide something specific for them and customized for this population. I think we can always take the learnings and the bones of those other programs, but I would really encourage you to think of this population is in and of itself. And that's really what we've seen. We've seen really work across BC and Alberta.
That's really insightful. It's not just like a leave behind or detail aid where it's just like you translate word for word. It's engaging with them, especially when you're doing events and one-on-one conversations. It's really
just another note. I think what we've seen is that when you translate, sometimes the words that are translated, the languages of these communities, they're thousands of years old and they don't have a word for heat pump. And so, when we're trying to convert, tankless hot water heater, it doesn't work. And so I would, that's where the contextualization really comes in.
Mm-hmm. That's really insightful. I was actually talking to someone from one of the associations last week, actually, and they were saying they just got approval for funding to translate training for I think it was for heat pumps, actually into French, even not from English to French, but from French, because it was an international company that was doing the training, from French, that's from like France French into Quebecois French. So I thought even French is not French sometimes. So I thought I was like, I had no idea. Um, a question here from Allison Fox is, you mentioned energy efficiency workshops, speaking engagements, and community booths / tables at events. How does EmpowerMe engage with and reach out to rural and remote communities that face their own unique energy challenges, not to mention the internet and other challenges that come along with that?
Yeah, great question, Allison. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. I'm not gonna lie. It's we really our model is around hiring people in these communities, and we have a model where we can replicate that and expand it. So we look for people in those communities. So even if a small town or city has a relatively small population of visible minorities, if you find that right person in those communities, and I might be answering another question here about hiring people and training them. So our model is we hire people and we train people from those communities. And when you find those right people in those rural communities, they will take that message into the homes of their network. And so we've really seen a great impact there. In terms of online, I think there is a great digital divide for these communities. But what we also know is that there's other spaces and places to connect with them. So we are on WeChat, we're on Weibo, we're on Telegram. So we're on the social media and the channels that these communities work with. So, maybe they're not on Zoom, but they're definitely on WeChat, and we get a lot of interaction there. So it's just about being creative and taking the cue from the communities. I don't know what the Korean community, where we should go for the Korean community. I really rely on our energy mentors, is what we call them, to help us design that piece of the program.
Yeah, and I think it's also about not being afraid to say, I don't know.
Totally. Oh, the humility is an important part. Yeah.
I always say, I think I say that at least once a day.
Yeah.
I usually say, I don't know, but my colleague Brendan Haley, who's our director of policy, he probably knows.
He probably does, yeah.
Just a question from Gabrielle here. I think a key problem that programs have is about how to integrate equity considerations when they are not initially built in with that purpose. What would you recommend organizations delivering programs do to add equity to those programs?
Well, that is a big question.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
No pressure.
I think it's really about analyzing who can access the programs. I would say that is the first step. Take a look at the programs and consider the populations that might have barriers to them. People of color, immigrants, rural. There's lots of different populations that have barriers to access. And I think what we have seen work time and time again is if you can design it with equity from the foundation, you're automatically going to be including everybody else behind it. Yeah, I would love to chat with you more about about that. It's a big topic. I'm sure lots of people have some ideas too about.
Something that is really interesting, Nicole Bailey asks, how do you find the key people in the community?
This is like the number one question people ask, and it is really hard. And I know some of our team is on the line here. It is really hard, but we've been in the community. We've been around for 8 years now, and we have a brand and we have a name in the community that's trusted, and I think that goes a long way. So people in that community know us. But it's really about, we find the social influencers before Jillian Harris was a thing. We're not looking for Jillian Harris. We're looking, and no offense to Jillian, but we're looking for the moms who are on the PTA committee, the people who are volunteering on Friday night prayers, the people who walk down their streets, they know their dentist, those are the people we look for, and word spreads in the community. When you start getting out from behind your desk and talking to people, you find those magical people. But it's hard, I'm not gonna lie. It is really hard. It takes a long time. Oh, Natalie, are you muted? Or is that just for me?
No, that's me.
Oh.
So one of the things I think you guys do really well is that you don't have a certain type of person, not just from a diversity perspective, but I mean also from like age diversity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You have people that are older, and then also like new grads. So you really have a range of ages that you work with as well, which I think is part of your success.
Mm-hmm.
A question here we have from Lise Dolan is, we have been dealing with these issues in remote northern, so Northwest Territory communities as well, especially have 11 official languages. There have been a lot of work to put into having a translator database / contact list. Is there something like this in different provinces?
Oh, Lise, I would love to talk to you. This is really something we are talking a lot about too. I think that is sort of the second layer of the barrier of once, families are understanding that maybe they want to take part of a rebate and get their installation done, they are more comfortable with contractors who speak their language and that they know and trust. And they're, not that I know of, I haven't heard of a list that says, these are the contractors for heat pumps that speak Punjabi. I haven't seen that. I would love create one if anybody wants to do that with me. Yeah, I think that would be amazing, and I think it's so needed because it's just the next step for folks to take action.
Yeah, and that would be really useful as well for any of the program administrators that have trade ally networks. Even if they just put like English, French, Punjabi, like all the different languages that they have access to, that would really help people as well. That's a really great idea.
And what we find is people kind of just go word of mouth, right? They ask their neighbor, they ask their auntie, they ask their friend, who did you use? And then you don't get those contractors who are potentially pushing rebates.
Yeah, exactly. And then Lise, I'm wondering as well if you could add to the chat, or you can ask a question and I'll add it to the chat or whatever. If the database that you do have is available to the public, and then we can share that with everyone here today. That would be useful. A question from Robert Greenwald is, he says, thanks for presenting. Have you considered an approach to remote home energy audits? For example, a New York-based energy and financial technology company, Sealed, implementing a program with several New York utilities, part of the Reforming the Energy Vision, so REV initiative.
Yes, short answer, yes. So we have done this. With oh, look, there's Kareem answering this too. Perfect. Let me make sure I say the same thing. Yes, it's less about what my energy audit states, but providing education around energy systems and how behavior impacts the bill. Yeah. And we've also done this in EmpowerMe. We've done it with some families who have physical disabilities to be able to come to our workshops, and lots of remote communities as well. So it's for EmpowerMe, I think Kareem's maybe specifically talking about community power there. EmpowerMe, definitely in terms of just having somebody walk through their home with an iPad. What's that dial on my wall? Where's my attic hatch? My furnace looks a little funky. Those kind of things for sure.
And I will just say as well, actually it's very timely because we actually, next Friday, we have our guest speaker is Alex Cornelio. He's a CTO and co-founder of EnergyX, and he's going to discuss virtual audits. So that was a timely question. It was not planted. So I'm just going to see if anyone has any other questions at this time. I think just a lot of people that want to just connect with you afterwards here. One more question, actually, from Allison Ashcroft. She's going to put a plug in here, so I'm going to read it. Is that the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners have developed an energy poverty mapping tool that is open, and anyone can go and look at the energy poverty measures and characteristics of those housing types and household demographics.
Thank you, Alison. And that is actually where I got a lot of my data. I do really recommend, if you're interested in looking at what energy poverty looks like in your neighborhood and in your space, that tool is great to really dig down, and you can filter by things like people of color, single parents who kind of skew women. So you can kind of see the disproportionate impacts and the layers of energy poverty.
So that's energypoverty.ca. So pretty easy to remember there. One more question from David Katz is, what about the Green Faith Network? Do you use churches and other faith networks?
Definitely, yes, 100%. So faith networks are a huge part of our connections. You know, the fabric of those communities is very strong in faith networks. So churches and mosques and temples and gurdwaras, you'll see us in the lobby, you'll see us after Friday night prayers, and it's amazing. The food is awesome. And, you know, I think that's such a magical thing about the work, is that we are in these places talking about energy efficiency and talking about air sealing. And, you know, when do you ever walk into your mosque and see that? So I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So I'm just aware of the time here, so I'm just going to end it up. But just a reminder, next week we're going to have our guest speaker. So it's Alex Cornelio, so the CTO and co-founder of EnergyX. Is going to discuss virtual audits. So in this session, Alex is going to walk through what they've learned by digging into how data science can solve these modern challenges. So it should be I find all these sessions really interesting and really insightful. So thank you so much, Yasmin, for joining us today. And I hope everyone see you next week. And I'll follow up again with that email to everyone so you can write your elected official in support of energy efficiency for Canada's economic recovery. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, everyone.